Hello guys, Crispy here, welcome back to another video. In this one, my friends, I'm gonna be testing the Radeon RX 7900 XTX in Assassin's Creed Shadows. This one is the XFX MERC 310 version of the card. I am running it with the latest AMD drivers and I'm not manually overclocking it. You can see all of its specs right here in Tech Power Ups, GPU-Z as usual, and over on the left I'm pairing it with a Ryzen 7 9800X 3D and 32GB of RAM. Let's get into it, shall we? So as you can see, this is the same area where we started with the RTX 5070 Ti, and right now I am actually running the exact same settings aside from the LAA, of course. So it's 4K, FSR set to native AA, and the scalability options are all set to the maximum, including ray tracing, alright? And yet, the 7900 XTX is actually running a little bit faster than the RTX 5070 Ti. However, the experience is going to be very similar, you know, it still will drop into the low 30s, probably 20s as well, inside of big forest areas, dense forest areas actually. So yeah, it's a pretty crappy experience anyways. We'll definitely utilize some upscaler to make it better, and also if you want it to be smooth, you'll need to use frame generation. This is one of those games that if you want to play at 4K, even with the RTX 5090 with maximum settings, you will need to utilize some upscaling as well as frame generation. But yeah, as you can see, it is definitely a little bit faster once again than that RTX 5070 Ti. That's good to see, although this consumes quite a lot more power, like 100 watts more on average, I guess. So yeah, it's less efficient obviously, but it's also a last generation GPU, so I'm not as mad as I was with the RTX 5070 Ti here, okay? Especially because this is already a 3-year-old GPU, guys. The reason why I was so mad with the 5070 Ti is because that's selling for $1,000, which is insane because it should cost $750 really in MSRP, you know, but it doesn't, and it's basically matching, not even matching honestly. It was a little bit slower than a 7900 XTX from almost 3 years ago. Buddy, please just die already. Okay, never mind. While costing pretty much the same. It's just, yeah. With ray tracing as well, which should be better on NVIDIA GPUs, but apparently NVIDIA is definitely not doing as well as AMD in Assassin's Creed Shadows, so there's that. Anyway, I'm gonna stop it right there, and I'm gonna try to make it a little bit better before changing some of the settings, and I'm gonna try quality FSR. I'm not sure if FSR will look great in this one yet, so let's try it out. I'm doing this for the first time. And it's a little bit softer, guys. Okay, I can tell that right away. It puts us in the 40s, which is much more bearable than it was previously, of course. And let me just go towards the sun over here so we can see the vegetation a little bit better. Well, I can see because you guys are gonna deal with YouTube compression, so it's just gonna suck for you. Doesn't look too pixelated, honestly. I was expecting a lot of pixelation issues because it's FSR, you know, but no, it looks really good on quality FSR and 4K resolution. So if you're playing at 4K and you want all of the bells and whistles enabled in terms of those graphics, which will look really, really good, honestly, if you have the ray tracing set to maximum as well. There's a huge difference when you disable that ray tracing, all right, in terms of the visuals, not so much in terms of FPS. But yeah, guys, at least on the NVIDIA GPUs, when I disabled, forgot to start counting the FPS, I'm sorry. When I disabled ray tracing there, it only improved things by like 10%. So instead of getting 40 FPS, you'd get 44 FPS, 50 FPS, you'd get 55 FPS, 60 FPS, you'd get 6 FPS. You get the idea, right? So the ray tracing didn't impact performance by all that much, but it did impact visuals a lot in this game. All right, it's just, it looks way different if you disable ray tracing or if you set it too low, actually. So yeah, I wouldn't really do that. Over here, by the way, with all of this vegetation moving, I can tell that FSR is enabled. Okay, so it sort of becomes a little bit of a smudge in some of these finer grass details that just disappear, you know? So FSR is definitely not a perfect upscaler, and over on the left arm, actually, I can see a lot of pixelation there. But at 4K resolution, it works just fine, and I'd have no problems utilizing it. Actually, this is a way better experience than what we started with, so I'm fine with that. 55 FPS average compared to 35. big improvement there. Not as much as we saw with DLSS quality, actually, because that's also not improving FPS by too much, but it seems like FSR kind of is. I want to see something, guys, because with the RTX 5070 Ti, when I had it set to native AA over here with the LAA, actually, not FSR again, so it's not exactly the same thing. But when I set it to 720p resolution internally, it was dropping from 60 FPS still, and I want to see if the 7900 XTX still drops from 60 FPS. Apparently, as you can see, lowering down the resolution a lot doesn't really fix the performance issues, doesn't really bump up the performance by a lot, you know, like we're used to seeing in other titles. And yeah, I guess it will inevitably start dropping slightly into the 50s in just a little bit, even at 720p resolution, but not as much as the 5070 Ti did. So it's definitely somewhat of a bottleneck within these cards, you know. I was trying to load different save files to go to the forest where I saw the 5070 Ti dropping the most and compare it a little bit there, but it's not really happening. I don't know what happened to that save file. It was an autosave as well, so maybe it just overrode itself or something. But as you can see over here in this one, it does drop into the 50s. So even at 720p resolution, the 7900 XTX also drops from 60 FPS. Not as much as the 5070 Ti did, but they're kind of pretty much similar in terms of performance in this game. This is just a little bit faster, actually. Now let's go back to quality FSR over here and play with frame generation. I'm going to enable that, and maybe this is the way to go. At least with the 5070 Ti, I preferred to play with DLSS performance with frame generation on top of it for a really smooth experience. And with a 90 FPS lock as well, so the input lag was consistent, you know. And over here, this is quality FSR, so it's not as low resolution as DLSS performance, but again, I mean, DLSS 4 does look better. Still, this looks really, really good. And with the frame generation, it sort of masks the pixelation issues that came with the FSR quality here at 4K resolution, because it makes things slightly softer, and the slightly softer look of frame generation sort of masks that pixelation issue that we had before. So it actually looks great right now, and it's smooth, 90 frames per second, with maxed out settings, ray tracing enabled as well, making the game look really pretty, actually, when the sun is hitting right, because when it's not, it's really bland, like, for example, over here. Right, this doesn't look like a next-gen title at all, but sometimes it does. I mean, with certain lighting, I think this game is actually a really, really pretty game in terms of graphics, alright? Running around here, not too bad. Sometimes inside of forests, it will drop into the 70s, so that becomes really noticeable in terms of input lag, of course. But aside from that, most of the time it's going to be really responsive still. Well, not really responsive, it's not as responsive as the native stuff, but I don't have complaints here, honestly, guys. But that will depend from person to person, okay? So just like with that 5070 Ti, this is probably how I would play this game. Some upscaling, some frame generation with the maximum settings still. And I see a lot of people saying, oh, you're stupid and you're dumb because you're not changing the settings and adjusting, and just turning off ray tracing will look the same and perform way better. But no, that doesn't happen. I'll show you, okay? Anyway, performance FSR, if you're wondering, with frame generation gets you up into the 100s. That's pretty nice. All right, a little bit faster, I think, once again, than that 5070 Ti with the DLSS 4 performance and frame generation at the same time. Over here, things drop into the 80s now. There's always a little stutter whenever you approach these forests for some reason. That's pretty weird. But the problem is, now it's actually a really soft image, especially compared with the DLSS 4. It's not pixelated, which is nice, alright? I prefer this than to the pixelation mess that earlier FSR implementations provided, you know, when you set it to FSR. This actually looks pretty good, but it's definitely a lot softer than it was before. And if I start turning around the camera like this, you can see some pixelation still around the character model. But if you need more FPS, if you need a higher refresh rate experience, it will get you that at 100 plus FPS with these settings, and it still looks really good. It feels responsive because now the the native FPS before the frame generation takes place are actually at around 60, I believe. So I'm just gonna turn FSR frame gen off. Yeah, there we go, 60s around here. Drops into the 50s probably inside of forest areas again. But yeah, it works. It works really well with the frame generation right now. But if you don't want frame generation, performance FSR won't really save the day, unfortunately. It will still dip down into the 50s sometimes. And over here, dropping into the 40s and 50s. Yeah, I see a lot of pixelation around the character again. But it's not too distracting, actually. And for the amount of vegetation that we're seeing, it's doing a good job. But alright, I'm gonna stop it right here. Okay, we're getting 60-something, 64 FPS right there. And I will go ahead and try it without the ray tracing. So if I select this option right here, it only works inside of the hideout. I think that's what it means. And I'm also going to change this to low. It shouldn't really affect much in terms of the ray tracing, because now it should be disabled where we are. Oh yeah, right. I forgot that we needed to reload the game to fully apply it. But as you can see, this is a vastly different look right now, guys. And this is still with performance DLSS, and it's still dropping into the 50s. So a lot of you were telling me, just disable ray tracing and everything will be fine. It doesn't really work like that, my friends. Alright, it gets you a little bit higher FPS, as you can see, around 74 instead of mid-60s around this area. But it changes the look of the game so much that I would not do this. This is one of the few games where I would prefer to leave ray tracing at maximum all of the time and play like that, because it looks really good with it, and without it, it's bland as heck, dude. I mean, usually in other titles you disable ray tracing, like Black Myth Wukong. It's extremely intensive with RT on, but if you disable RT, it looks pretty much the same, just slightly worse, I guess. And it performs with like double the FPS. This is not the case here, once again. But hey, instead of ultra high, let's check out high, for example, over here. Apply that, reload the game, and here we go. Still very bland in terms of graphics, over here inside of forest especially. And now, this is still performance FSR, remember that, okay? And we're getting 100s, 90s. Inside of the forest, it did drop a little bit. I didn't really pay attention, so let me go there again. Start counting the FPS as well. But yeah, really bland look, because that ray tracing will only be enabled in the hideout area. At least inside of the forest, it doesn't really drop by too much like it did previously. So high settings are actually fixing that problem, which drops into the 50s and so on. It doesn't look anywhere near as good as it did previously. And at this point, I think Assassin's Creed Valhalla looks better than this. Alright, while performing better at the same time. In Valhalla, you could max out that game, play at 4K native resolution, not performance FSR like I'm doing right now, and it would perform with around the same FPS, like 100 frames per second or something like that. So, yeah, not liking this too much. This is why I prefer to use upscaling and frame generation instead of lowering down the settings to high or the ray tracing turned off and stuff, because again, this just becomes a last gen game in terms of looks. And if you want to play at native resolution, look at that. We're getting 60s and 50s still. Now we get poor performance for the graphics, in my opinion, while still lowering down from 60 frames per second at 4K resolution. Yeah, I know. I'll get to 1440p later, okay? But yeah, if this card can run other titles at 4K just fine, while looking better than this, I don't see why this needs to be so intensive. And this is why I think that this game is pretty broken in terms of its optimization. And lowering it down to 1440p resolution, alright, this is borderless full screen, so I'm actually going to lower it here in the Windows as well. And here we have it, 2560 by 1440, native AA and FSR, high settings. We were seeing 50s at 4K resolution, and now at 1440p, we're seeing 90s. That's actually a big improvement. So it still drops into like the 80s and 70s. It's a bigger improvement than I thought it would be. because of the high settings, I guess. It's still meh for the looks, once again, low 70s at times. But if you keep the high settings preset instead of ultra high or ray tracing enabled and stuff like that, it seems like there will be a much bigger difference between resolutions here in this game. Okay, at least there's that. But again, you're losing a lot, visually speaking, if you don't enable that ray traced global illumination. And let's check it out on very high, I guess. Here we go. Very high settings are now applied, still with no ray tracing, so not as good looking and kind of bland looking again. Also, I can just showcase it right here. You can see that this is so much blander looking, right, than this. And this is a totally different image for some reason, but yeah, there is a huge difference just by going from diffuse hideout, which is only in the hideout, to diffuse everywhere. It just pops so much more. But yeah, as you can see, very high settings working just fine. It doesn't seem to be very different in terms of visual quality and FPS wise compared to high settings here. But let's see, like, ray tracing over here and the ray tracing quality on high instead of ultra high. Maybe that will work a lot better. And nope. Okay, so as soon as you enable that diffuse everywhere lighting and stuff to make it look like a next-gen title, basically, and to make it look like a 2025 game, it just craps itself. We drop from 60 FPS again at 1440p resolution. So yeah, if you want next-gen graphics, really pretty game right here with the ray tracing enabled, you need to enable that ray tracing and then you drop into the 60s, even at very high settings with 1440p resolution and the 7900 XTX, which is a very fast GPU, just like the 5070 Ti is, just like the 4080 is, 4080 Super, etc. But this game is just really broken when you have that global illumination everywhere. Now let's try high settings again. This sets the ray tracing quality to medium. Let's apply that, restart. And here we have it, high settings with the ray tracing enabled. Still 60-ish FPS. I guess it's a little bit better than it was with very high, but it's still super demanding once again. So we'll need to utilize some upscaler just like we did with the RTX 5070 Ti. And once again, just like in that video, I didn't test high settings, very high settings and stuff like that. And a lot of people told me, it's only running poorly because you maxed out everything. Since there isn't that big of a difference in terms of FPS, I would just max out everything. Why not, right? Like, it makes the game look a lot prettier, so why not do that? If you gain like 5 FPS by having it on high instead of ultra high with the ray tracing enabled at the same time. I'm just sick of people saying, oh, you're dumb because you didn't test this or whatever, but I know what I'm doing, all right? I know what I'm doing. I've tested things off camera that you're not seeing, all right? And I chose the best visuals that I think I would play at least the game with. What am I doing? Let's use native AA, yes, and let's bump it up to ultra high again, okay? And I will actually manually select ultra high everywhere because, well, why not? You get within the same range of FPS even if you don't do this, so might as well max out everything, make it look really pretty. And as you can see, instead of dropping to like 55 FPS, we're dropping to 40 something FPS. It's definitely a big hit, but we got so much denser vegetation and stuff that I would actually take that hit. That's my opinion. Of course, a lot of people prefer to have higher FPS and so on. But in this particular case, since the difference in visual fidelity is quite big and the difference in performance is small, I would choose this. Just max out everything. The game runs like crap on native, but add some frame generation on top of it, and it should be a pretty enjoyable experience. Yeah, look at that, 100 FPS now. Smooth, doesn't bother me in terms of input lag either. I can work with this, I can play with this and have an absolute blast of an experience like this, and it still retains that native 1440p look with the FSR native AA, with the frame generation on top, smoothing out everything and making everything look really pretty. Even here with the birds, sometimes with frame generation enabled, you see a lot of ghosting effects around them. Not seeing any of that. And now you can take advantage of next-gen graphics with a ton of foliage density and vegetation density. Really pretty graphics with the ray tracing, reflections everywhere, specular as well. It just looks really nice, and it plays really nice. This is why I chose not to test other presets with the 5070 Ti. And I was really mad, and I still am, about the game not scaling properly between resolutions. That's a big shame. But hey, at least it looks really nice, and it can be enjoyable with some trickery, frame generations, quality DLSSs, and so on. So this is the way to go if you're at 1440p resolution, guys. It will be a good experience, but it is still a big shame how this game runs. In my opinion, it should run like this with the frame generation enabled, but at native resolution on a 7900 XTX and a 5070 Ti and stuff. But no, it doesn't, because ray tracing is just stupid intensive. And in this particular case, it's not a matter of you disable it and the game looks 5% less good, or worse, actually. Yeah, this is a matter of you disable it and it starts looking like a last-gen title. But anyways, guys, let's lower it down to 1080p resolution. I know some of you out there looking for extremely high frame rates will actually be playing at 1080p and are playing at 1080p with the 7900 XTX, even with a 4090 and stuff like that. And at 1080p res, we're getting 100 FPS around here. That's pretty good, actually. Do I still have frame gen enabled? Actually, I think I do. Yes, I do. Okay, so see, if those were the FPS at 1080p max settings with the ray tracing on and everything looking like a next-gen title, I would be happy with it. But the fact that you disable frame generation and get 60 FPS at 1080p and drops into the 50s, that is just atrocious. So you already know, to make the game enjoyable and smooth, you'll need to enable that frame generation even at 1080p resolution. Okay, but that's not the end of the world. It will be a good experience. It will look really good at the same time in this particular title. And I'm really happy to see that the FSR native AA as well as the frame generation from FSR here in this title work really well, but it still does drop into the 50s, so you'll need some FSR frame gen to make it a lot better. And there's that, my friends. I think that's been it for this video. I hope you guys enjoyed, and now you know the performance with different presets and stuff like that. And if you agree with me, you're probably gonna think that it's not worth disabling the ray tracing everywhere in this particular title. So thanks very much for watching, and as always, catch you in the next one. Love you all. Bye-bye.